Hey everybody, Smart Silver Stacker here. So the price of silver is down about 3% today at the time I am recording this video. And I want to talk about why, because it tells us something very important about this economy and what is driving these markets. So according to this article from Niels Christensen over at Kitco, one of the primary catalysts for this decline in the price of silver, this correction that we're seeing today, was the release of the Institute of Supply Management's, the ISM, their Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index, which measures economic activity in the service sector of the economy. And this number, it printed higher than expectations, so it was supposed to drop to 53.5. Those were the expectations. Instead, it rose to 56.5. And so this shows us that there's more activity in the service sector of the economy than previously thought. And this is good economic news, at least ostensibly. So why are we seeing stocks falling on this news? Why are we seeing silver correcting, gold correcting? Why are we seeing the US dollar strengthen on this news? You would think good economic news would lead markets to go higher, but instead we're seeing them fall. And the reason is that the only thing driving price action in these markets today is the Federal Reserve and what they do next. And it's an example of good news is bad news in this twisted economic environment that we find ourselves in. And it makes sense because the entire economic recovery that we have seen, really since the 2008 crisis, has been entirely a result of the Federal Reserve opening a giant floodgate of liquidity, keeping interest rates at record low levels for over a decade, buying up more than $8 trillion worth of assets and pumping all of that cash out into the economy and raising asset prices tremendously. This is a sign of a very sick economy. I also want to take a look at the US dollar index chart here because part of the reason we've been seeing such big gains in silver, even after this correction, is still up, I think, almost 10% month over month. So, this is really just a correction in a bull market in the precious metals, if you ask me. So take a look at the US dollar index and you can see it's rallying a bit today, and that probably has something to do with why silver is falling as well. Because what we've seen is as the dollar goes up, the dollar denominated price of precious metals falls, and as the US dollar index comes down, the price of the precious metals has been going up. The US dollar index broke down from this parabolic uptrend that it had been in for almost a year and a half. It makes a lot of sense that it would rally at this point because it's gotten so oversold. This collapse in the US dollar index has been so sharp that we would expect to see some kind of a relief rally, at least at this point. And so I think that's all this is. And that means that today is really the kind of day that I like to buy silver because it doesn't seem like there's going to be some precipitous drop from this point. I think that the US dollar here clearly has broken down from its parabolic uptrend, and it probably is going to continue falling. And this is more or less just a dead cat bounce. That's my interpretation of this chart. Pullbacks like today, I think, are a good opportunity to get out, get some physical silver, like, your bars, your coins. Also, it's probably a good idea to pick up some mining stocks if some of those have a pullback. Now, of course, not financial advice. I'm just telling you what I'm doing, but this is the kind of day I like to go shopping for that sort of thing. I put out a video earlier this year about how 2022 is going to be a great year for silver. And, we did have a lot of pain earlier this year. We saw silver touch down to, I think, almost $18 on the lows. But we've seen a really nice rally since then, and I'm kind of hoping that at the very least, we're going to finish up 2022 in the green. Now, the closing price for silver on January 3rd, 2022 was $22.92. So even with today's breakdown, we're pretty close to closing the year in the green. I mean, overnight, futures touched over 23 bucks. So if we can maintain some of the momentum that we've had over the past month and we get some more good days in silver, which I think we will, 2022 might not be a great year for silver, but it's going to be an okay year, and we may actually finish up the year in the green. I think that would be pretty interesting if the silver market did that. Now, on that note, I want to give you a forecast, a price forecast for 2023. And it's not a specific number. I'm not going to pull a number out of the air. I mean, there's all sorts of indicators you can look at and try to extrapolate a price target for it. But I do believe 2023 is going to be a year when we see the price of precious metals, and especially silver, really take off. And I want to share with you 4 reasons that I believe that will be the trend moving forward. So the first part is the physical supply of silver. Now, the Silver Institute released a report recently about how 2022 is having record physical demand. It is the biggest physical silver deficit in decades. And also, we have seen the inventory levels at exchanges like the COMEX and the LBMA. We've seen their inventories fall significantly this year. Now, this is the latest data from the COMEX, and you can see here that the eligible silver is about 264 million ounces. Registered silver, that's the silver that's ready to be delivered to fulfill contracts, at about 35 million. The COMEX says that only about 50% of their eligible silver can really be considered as something that could be turned into registered silver or, made deliverable very easily. So essentially, when you look at these numbers, it means there's about 167 million ounces on the COMEX that can actually be delivered to fulfill future contracts. Now, also here on this data, you can see that the open interest right now is 125,798 contracts, and at 5,000 ounces a pop, that comes out to an open interest of almost 629 million ounces. And so there's 167 million ounces available that could be used to fulfill those contracts. So you can see there's a pretty big discrepancy here. And if there was some kind of a rush to the exits, to physical out of paper, there's not enough metal there to meet the demand. And that is when you can see a silver squeeze. And yeah, I think that there's a real possibility that 2023, we may see the actual silver squeeze, the fulfillment of that prophecy that started back in early 2021. And, when it didn't happen right away in 2021, I think a lot of people like to pile on the bandwagon and say, oh, there's never going to be a silver squeeze. But, things like this take time. And there's no telling exactly when they're going to happen. But certainly in the environment that we find ourselves in of high inflation and disrupted global supply chains, there's a real possibility for a squeeze. We've seen several in other commodities over the past several years. We had one last year in 2021 in rhodium, where the price shot up to almost $30,000 an ounce. We had one earlier this year in palladium, where the price more than doubled, went to over $3,000 an ounce. That was following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and Russia produces a lot of palladium, and so we saw a squeeze there. And palladium, of course, also is a metal with a tremendously small supply, so it doesn't take a lot to squeeze that. We also saw a big run up in the price of nickel earlier this year. The nickel market basically was broken. Paper markets were disrupted and halted. And even non-metal commodities, we've seen big squeezes in. I mean, look at the price of lumber, two big spikes up in 2021 and 2022. So we're in an environment where physical commodities they can get squeezed. It's easy for it to happen because there's a lot of fiat currency out there and there's a limited supply because, the economy is in the dumps. We don't produce anything, we're in the midst of a deep recession, and, they tweak the numbers and everything to make it look like we're not. But bottom line is there's less stuff and there's more currency. So the situation is ripe for a squeeze. So I think we might get a squeeze in 2021. That's the first part of my forecast here. Second part of my forecast here is that the price of precious metals is going to continue moving up. The price action that we've seen over the past several weeks with the dollar breaking down and metals increasing is not going to stop. And that's because of the forces of de-dollarization, which I think 2023, we're going to see a major increase in de-dollarization. It's just today, December 5th, that the G7 price cap and the EU embargo on Russian oil is going into effect. And this is just further deglobalization. It's a further breakdown in global supply chains. And also, it is a further weaponization of the dollar and Western financial institutions. It's a big incentive for countries to dump the US dollar and to get into assets like gold and silver. And that's exactly what we are seeing happen. Countries around the world, China, for example, they're dumping US treasuries, buying physical gold at an incredibly fast clip. India, they're buying a lot of silver there. They are trading with Russia using rupee and ruble swaps, so they are no longer using the dollar in their bilateral trade. And this is just a trend that is going to continue. And it's not going to be like there's a big announcement, unless, of course, China announces a gold-backed currency or something. That's always a possibility. But more or less, it's just going to be death by 1,000 cuts. The Eurasian Union just proposed a BRICS United Payment System, which will make trade between the partner countries much easier and will no longer require the dollar as an intermediary currency. If we get Saudi Arabia, if they join the BRICS nations and they start selling Oil for a currency other than the dollar. That'll be a huge de-dollarization move, risk to the dollar's reserve status and also to the petrodollar system, which has been going on for more than 50 years. So, this is just a trend that is going to put a lot of upward pressure on precious metals and a lot of downward pressure on the US dollar index and the value of the dollar. And, the technical picture kind of paints that as well. You look at that breakdown from that parabolic rise in the US dollar. Now, the third reason that I believe 2023 is going to be a great year for precious metals like gold and especially silver is because of the massively ballooning levels of debt and deficits around the world, and particularly here in the US and in the West. We've got credit card debt now at a record high in this country. It is nearly $1 trillion, and the rates on that credit card debt are near record highs as well. They're beginning to creep up as rates go up. And so that debt is going to be growing at a tremendous level. We've got US government debt, $31.4 trillion. We've got a $1.2 trillion deficit. The trade deficit ballooned in October. It is up to almost $99 billion a month, so more than $1 trillion a year. Our trade deficit for goods. And there was these job numbers that came out recently that were supposedly better than everybody thought. It was a great payroll report, the non-farm payroll jobs report. We're adding all these jobs. Well, if you go into the details on that, one of the interesting things is that we added very few manufacturing jobs. I think about 14,000, which is a very low number, but we added a tremendous number of service sector jobs. So what does that tell us? Well, it means that there's more people out there in the economy working and earning a paycheck, but they're not producing any goods. Now, they might be producing services. We're talking about the goods trade deficit here. So all those folks are going to go out and they're going to be buying things, but they're not going to be making any goods to put into the economy. So this trade deficit problem is going to get a lot worse. And also, based on those jobs numbers, expect inflation to continue moving up as well, as more currency, more money is going to be chasing a lower number of goods. Now, the fourth part of my forecast and why I think 2023 is going to be a great year for gold and silver and why we're going to see much higher prices for the precious metals in the near future is the Fed itself. Like I said earlier, everything about these markets is predicated on what the Fed does next. And more importantly, it's predicated on what the markets expect the Fed to do next. Now, the Fed loves to jawbone these markets. They like to come out, they see prices moving up too fast, they see bond yields moving in a direction they don't like. They love to come out and try to manipulate the market. One day they're hawkish, one day they're dovish, one day they're hawkish, one day they're dovish. They're trying to walk this fine line. But the truth is they are stuck between a rock and a hard place. I mean, they're eventually going to have to face the decision to either collapse this economy and usher in the worst depression in any living memory, or they're going to have to inflate the currency away because the way things are going, the economy, we're already in a recession if you ask me, but the signs of that recession are going to become impossible to ignore in the near future, probably in 2023. The Fed is either going to have to come to the rescue and print money and lower rates and become incredibly dovish in the face of rising inflation, still rising inflation, or they're going to have to make the hard decision and collapse everything. And I think we know what the Fed's going to do. They're going to do what central banks always do. They are going to kick the can down the road. And that means when the Fed does that, when the Fed comes out and becomes dovish again, when they start printing money again, when they start buying up bonds openly on the market with open market operations and quantitative easing, the price of precious metals is going to absolutely explode. And hard to say if that's going to be in 2023 or not. If it's not 2023, I would say 2024 is a pretty good candidate. I expect it to happen sooner rather than later. But regardless of when it happens, the writing is on the wall, and I believe the end game at this point is inevitable. So that's my forecast for 2023. And I always like to know what you think, and I like to get a finger on the pulse of what's going on with stackers out there. So please do leave a comment. And thank you very much for watching, everybody. Hope you have a great day. Stay safe and happy stacking. I'll catch you next time. Smart Silver Stacker, out.